Hi, I'm Nicci, and I'm here to talk about losing a loved one to drug addiction. So, I was born into this really beautiful family, beautiful and intense, and sometimes difficult, but altogether like loving and amazing. And sort of part of being in our family, we're very traditional Italian, which doesn't necessarily have to mean anything, but in my family, it sort of manifested as really knowing your place and knowing who you are to the family, and recognizing your role. And it wasn't like an overarching mean, like you have to do this. It was more just like we see how a family runs, and I want to help contribute to that sort of chemistry. So we did. That was a big part of our lives. Our friends were our cousins when we were growing up, and that was great. I still, to this day, live and die for my fam. But, so, in sort of trying to recognize that sort of where we belong, I think a lot of us felt a lot of pressure to be different than what we thought we could offer as we were. And I think part of that often manifests in addiction. My family has a through line of struggling with addiction, be it alcohol, drugs, cutting, food, all that kind of stuff. We all self-medicate a sort of pressure that I think all of us sort of feel. So for a lot of us, So for my older brother, that sort of manifested in drugs. As far as I know, Lou, he started doing drugs sometime in high school. I believe he went into rehab for the first time when he was 16. He was 10 years older than me, so, a lot of that was sort of abstracted to me. I wouldn't have known about all the goings-ons. I did know that he was going away and he was sick, and and he came back. We were hoping that he was going to be better. From what I remember, he went away for about 2 or 3 days, and then my dad went to go pick him up. The pressure of being there to help his son, I think, is something that's constant with my dad. He feels like he is not doing enough if he's not equipped to help fix our problems. It absolutely comes from a place of love, but it also absolutely sometimes obscures what actually will help all of us. I believe that he went into rehab when he was 16 for the first time, and then the years following were rough. He dropped out of school. He would get in fights with my parents all the time. He just always seemed to be, hiding something. And, still, I don't necessarily even think that he was always hiding drugs. I think Lou always just felt like he had parts of himself that he wasn't allowed to sort of let show. He was insecure. He was, but he was in complete denial about it. And I mean, he was definitely a positive person, but you would talk to him about his drug usage and be like, well, it's okay to be upset. It's okay to do these things. He said, even when I was the most down and out, I was never depressed. I'd be sitting in a jail cell and I'd never be depressed. And, when someone is, for me, that was really difficult to sort of maneuver around, because I struggle with depression my whole life. So, to me, it seemed logical, okay, self-medicating for depression. But because he wouldn't sort of recognize any of that, it was hard for me to sort of talk with him about it. And mind you, by the way, I have 5 brothers, so there's a lot of us. And Lou is my oldest one, and then there was Johnny, Ray, me, Chris, Joe. And so, as I was getting older, it was still sort of out of my eye line, because I was 10 years is a big difference when you're, 25 and 15 and stuff like that. Like, it's enough to keep my view. It was enough to keep my view of him at bay and just see my older brother. But, the problem being with addiction, it never only hurts the addict. And I would find it trickling down in ways that I didn't understand. My parents were especially stressed out about me with drugs and drinking and everything, and it made no sense because I didn't do any of that, at least, not yet. Like, I was in high school, and I cared about school. I had enough going on that I didn't really need to be drinking all the time, and I wasn't, especially popular, so it's not like I was going out to ragers all the time. Like, I really was a pretty dialed down kid, and so, but I would feel all of these, consequences for things that I had never done. Like, I would be punished for being out too late when I was out too late because I was at a friend's house too late. Like, I wasn't out partying, I'm sure they were terrified of, and I wasn't doing wasn't doing drugs when I wasn't answering the phone. So it always was sort of a negative thing coming back on me and all of my siblings, from Johnny all the way down to Joe. So, as time went on, that sort of tension grew bigger and bigger, and it was especially frustrated because Lou really had no recognition of the fact that it was sort of in part due to him. He really didn't understand that, you are hurting all of us by hurting yourself. Lou was always struggling, and that's only something that I've, come to terms with now. Because for a long time it seemed, okay, he's not doing well. Okay, he's doing better now. Okay, he's on the up and up. And that is very much the system of an addict, especially one who's trying to, get better. But he always seemed to go back to it. Always was clean, and then literally broke our hearts by overdosing and coming to family parties up, in his eyes you could see, and it turned into you just could never trust him. You could never believe what he was saying. You could never really feel like he was being straight with you, because he didn't, the thing about addicts and liars is that they don't even know what the truth is anymore. Their truth is in a pill or a pipe or whatever, they don't even understand, they eschew their reality because they've quite literally created a new god. Ultimately, everything seems to come back to the drugs, and it takes them away from everything they love. Lou had said so many times, I want my family to trust me again. I want people to believe me. I want to be able to live a life. I want to have kids, and do these things that I know I'm supposed to do. But ultimately, at the end of the day, he always went back. So, the pattern of doing well and overdosing and doing well and overdosing was pretty consistent, and every time it just got worse and worse and worse. And eventually, it was February of 2016, and Lou actually had to go into the hospital because he had pneumonia, but it was a really intense pneumonia. I don't know, he had fluid that turned to solid in his lung. I don't know, something gross. But he had to get it drained, and we were all really freaked out because we didn't really know what was going on for a while. And then he left and then had to come back, and I found out later from my mom, because Lou has a different mom because from my dad's first marriage. So I talked to my mom, and she had told me that whilst at the hospital, we were all everybody was worried around him he's about to get surgery soon, and turns out that Lou had someone come to the hospital and bring him 4 bars of Xanax. and he was up, like really bad. Never mind the fact that like he's about to go into surgery at any time. Never mind the fact that we're all freaked out. He literally could not think of any other solution to his problem than to get up. That was his truth now. And it was, I mean, obviously it was so inconsiderate. Like, we were scared for him to live, and he got high instead. And I understand he was scared. He probably was really scared and didn't know how to handle it. But none of us got to leave that fear by taking a bunch of Xans. Like, we were just there living it. And like, I wasn't at the hospital because I was at school, but you know, we were all on the edge. We were scared. So yeah, when my mom called and said that, you know, it was the end of I was at the end of my rope. I was always driving him places, trying to help him, like, but also like getting more and more resistant to him every time. So by this time it was the last straw for me. I remember my mom saying to me, like, telling the whole story, and I said, why doesn't he just overdose already? Relieve us of the weight. So then the next week was spring break. I had an opportunity, like, I saw him once after, and everything was fine. Everything had to be fine because, you know, even then he said, you know, I don't know, I feel like everybody's mad at me. Like, yeah, dude, you don't care about us. And that's genuinely how we all felt, you know? You care about us until you care about yourself. And he always would care about himself more. So that spring break was especially difficult because I wanted to go see him and I drove past his house, but I was so mad. That week I threw around so many, like, my drug addict brother, just said all the foulest shit about him because I was pissed. And I drove back past his house and I said maybe I should go see him, go talk to him. I said no, that. And then I went back to school, went to a rehearsal, and then my friend Kaylee got a a text from my mom saying, like, hey, Kaylee, don't tell Nicci, but I'm just, like, looking to find out where she is. And Kaylee, like, hadn't read the text. She just noticed. She said, oh, your mom texted me, and then read the text and was like, oh, well. Like, as it turns out, my mom was on her way to Pennsylvania to pick me up. I lived about an hour from school, and she came with my Aunt Anna, and then she walked in and said, Nick, I have some really bad news. Your brother is gone. Yeah. It is amazing how something can change everything. So, you know, you don't realize how much of your identity is built around someone existing until they're gone. And it's stupid little things, like, I have always had 5 brothers. And, like, do I still have 5 brothers now? Like, yeah. But, like, you know, if I'm dating someone and I say, oh, you're gonna meet all my family, like, and I say 5 brothers, like, it's just, I never had to think about it before, that's all. And then there's, like, no matter what you do, everything's attached to it. The thing about Lou was that everybody always insisted that I was just like him, which is always how these kinds of stories go. Like, oh, you were just like your brother, like, whatever. And it used to piss me off, and then, like, he died, and then I was like, well, before I even got to actually know him, like, and know about myself from him, I was so mad at him his whole life that I never actually tried to be his friend, you know? I mean, I did. We were friends. But, you know, ultimately it was always something between us, and I didn't know what the something was, but that's what it was. The drugs. So anyway, ultimately, when something happens like this, when you lose someone, you begin to question everything about who you are. You don't know your identity anymore, and then people start associating you with grief, and then they're like, oh, Nicci, how are you doing? And you start to forget that you had a life before this horrible thing happened. You forget that you had interests, and you had chemistry, and you had goals, because everything seems obscured by this giant question mark of, like, well, what the hell do I do now? And I guess ultimately, the biggest thing that Lou's death took from me was my clear idea of myself. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I believed in, because a fundamental part of what I believed in was that things would always work out. And then they didn't. And then I was miserable for a while, doing crazy, ridiculous things, just like drinking all the time. My cutting was at some of its worst, just trying to get high and feeling like guilty for getting high, because that's why we were in those circumstances in the first place. And then all of a sudden one day I woke up after a party, and I didn't remember how I got home, what happened. I didn't remember anything. And I said, you're gonna die. I mean, I'm sure Lou didn't think, like, he would have went out the way he did because of drugs and because he just couldn't get away from it. But that's how it happens. And, you know, never mind the drugs, like, I didn't remember where I was the night before. I didn't remember how I got home. Anything could have happened to me. I could have gotten hit by a car. And somewhere inside of me, I saw, like, my dad crying, like, about my brother and thinking about, like, how much of a heartbreak that was for him. And I said, if nothing else, I've got to care about him enough to take care of me. And, you know, the more you do that, the more you practice that sort of behavior, the more you find a reason to. You find you like it. So I guess if you now are going through that, all I want to say is forgive yourself for the terrible shit you're probably going to do. Grief is weird. There's no way to, like, there's no perfect equation to figure it out. Forgive yourself for doing what you know you shouldn't do, and have faith that you will find you again. You just have to start from the bottom up. It sucks and it's hard, but because you've built it yourself instead of just inheriting it and finding life putting you somewhere, you decided this is who you were gonna be. And you know what it means, because life could end whenever it wants. And if it's gonna, you're gonna go out like you, right?